As someone who works in politics and is connected to people who work inside the DNC, let me tell you why I think they're burying their report on what went wrong in 2024. In case you missed it, when Ken Martin became the DNC chair, he commissioned this report and said it was absolutely crucial to figure out where we went wrong so that we could move forward and avoid the same mistakes. Now that the report is done, and I'm sure cost a ton of donor dollars, by the way, Martin is changing his tune and is saying the report will not be released because it would be counterproductive for the party. I think the truth is that releasing it would be counterproductive to the DNC's narrative that they're crafting for the party thus far. They have publicly fought very hard against younger and more progressive ideology making its way into the party. They ousted David Hogg from the DNC, they were famously unsupportive of Zoran Mamdani, who went on to win by margins no one expected, and most alarmingly, they weren't very protective of vulnerable communities who got put in the crosshairs after last election cycle, like LGBTQ youth. Frankly, I think they don't want to admit the fact that the problem wasn't that the party was too woke, it's that their mainstream representatives don't actually fight for the policies people desperately need.
I want you to watch this interview that Ken Martin, the chair of the DNC, did with John Favreau at Pod Save America. And then I'm going to tell you why it makes me so fucking angry, and it's not going to be for the reasons you think.
I want to start with the 2024 Autopsy, which you call an after-action review. When you won the chairmanship in February of 25, you criticized the DNC's refusal to release their 2016 autopsy as exactly what not to do. You said, quote, "Was there any utility in doing that?" And then promised your 2024 autopsy would be different. Your exact quote was, "Of course it will be released." Why did you change your mind on that?
Well, look, I mean, what I said all along, even when I ran for this position, is that we were going to focus on the things that will help us win the upcoming election, right? Making sure that we learn the right lessons that could help inform our victories. And that's what we've done. We said this when we sent out the press release back in November saying we weren't going to release the report.
Trust is built by keeping your word, by when you make a promise, you keep it. And if you can't, for whatever reason, you got to be able to articulate why in a way that brings people in and shows transparency. What Ken does in this interview, and he's not going to like that I'm saying this, he really doesn't, is he undermines trust in this institution. It actually does an incredible disservice to our long-term health as a party. The correct answer in this interview was, you know what, John, you're right and I was wrong. We're releasing that autopsy report today because I understand that it is important for people to trust that the DNC will keep its word. It's on our website right now. He just released it 6 months ago or after the election. It would have been a 2-week bad news story and people would have moved on.
Let's be real for a second. When a political party loses a major election, the first thing people expect is honesty. Not spin, not buzzwords, but a clear explanation of what actually went wrong and what is going to change moving forward. And before we go any further, let's define one key thing in simple terms so everyone is on the same page. The DNC, or the Democratic National Committee, is basically the main organization that helps run the Democratic Party. They coordinate campaigns, raise money, support candidates, and help shape the overall direction of the party. So when something goes wrong in a national election, this is one of the main groups responsible for figuring out why. And that is why the situation with the DNC's 2024 election autopsy is getting so much attention, because this is not just about a report. This is about trust, transparency, and whether leadership is willing to follow through on what they said they would do. And to understand why voters were frustrated in the first place, you also have to look at what people were dealing with in real life during that time. For example, something as basic as the cost of groceries, including eggs, became a real issue for a lot of households. Now, to be clear, the government does not directly control egg prices. But during the Biden administration in 2020, late 2021, a combination of factors pushed prices higher when it came to eggs and things like that, with the major bird flu outbreak that reduced the number of egg-laying chickens, which limited supply. And when supply goes down, while demand stays steady, prices go up. That's basic economics. So on top of that, you had higher fuel costs. It was like $5 per gallon, higher feed cost, and broader inflation across the economy, which made production and transportation more expensive. So while those factors are not caused by one single policy, the reality is that voters associate rising costs with whoever is in charge at the time. And this is where people start raising eyebrows, because when everyday life feels more expensive, that shapes how people vote, whether it's fair or not. The context matters. Now back to the situation. The DNC conducted a full internal review to figure out why Kamala Harris lost to President Trump. And the DNC chair, Ken Martin, had previously said that this report would be released. He even pointed out that not releasing the 2016 report was a mistake, which set the expectation that this time would be different. But now the message has changed. Now the explanation is that releasing the report would be counterproductive, quote unquote, and that people should focus on the lessons instead. And that raises a simple, very simple common sense question. If the report was important enough to create, why is it not important enough to share? Because if you won't show the work, people are naturally going to question the answer. Goes back to school, right? When I was in high school and I was learning algebra 1 or algebra 2, just mathematics in general. If you can't teach back what the teacher taught you, then how are you going to be able to pass the test and also learn the lessons that's needed when it comes to the mistakes you have came across that you needed to learn to be able to teach it back? If I couldn't sit there and show my work on my mathematic problem, then obviously, did I really know what I was doing? So we're going to break this down and look at the different perspectives, and then I'll give my thoughts. Because from a practical point of view, this is one of those situations where the explanation ends up creating more questions than the original issue. So yes, we are seeing internal disagreements within the Democratic Party over this 2024 autopsy, which was supposed to explain what went wrong and what needs to change moving forward. But instead, we now have a situation where leadership is essentially saying, we figured it out, but you don't need to see it. And for a lot of people, that doesn't sit right. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel. And before we check out this next clip, it also makes me wonder, and just food for thought, family. I'm not telling you what to think. We're just having a conversation. If they can't share what they figured out, which was the mistakes and the lessons they needed to learn moving forward to share with their voters, let alone being transparent, is it really showing party over people or people over party? Anyway, family, check out this next clip.
DNC is refusing to release its 2024 election autopsy, but someone apparently leaked it to Axios. And it concluded that Kamala Harris lost significant support because of Biden's Gaza policy. Do you think that's why they're keeping it secret?
Yes, 100%. And we're taping this on the day the DNC just voted to reject a motion calling for the condemnation of AIPAC, which is very unpopular in the Democratic Party, but the DNC said, no. The DNC is, of course, the establishment, the Democratic National Committee of the party. It's very strange to do a post-mortem on why you lost and then not tell people why you lost. What was the point of doing it? Because you got results you didn't like? We knew, those of us who said Gaza would be an issue in the election, unfortunately, we were frustratingly vindicated. Those of us who tried to sound the alarm bell and say, Democrats, people are not going to turn out in swing states. People in places like Michigan, some of them might even vote for Trump. They're going to buy his bullshit about being anti-war. How did that work out? And we were shot down. Oh, you're letting Trump in. You're not being clear. No, we're just telling you what people are thinking. People are upset. And there was a denial.
The reason that Ken Martin and the DNC and the donors decided that they need to scrap the autopsy and not release it to the public, despite their pledges to release it to the public, is explicitly because it mentioned Gaza.
Oh, yeah. Ken Martin's a coward on this issue.
100%.
Ken Martin becomes the chair of the Democratic Party. He says, I promise I will release the report. We made a mistake when we didn't do it in 2016. Then he finds out Gaza contributed to the loss and he buries the report. Ken Martin, you're a coward, man. I don't know what to say.
100%. It is insane because when the DNC, Ken Martin, and Democratic donors decided to keep the election autopsy secret, I think that they made a bet that everything would just eventually blow over with Israel and Gaza. It's so annoying to watch Democrats pretend to be populist when it fits their agenda by being like weirdly conservative on social issues and ignore, disrespect, and just literally condescend voters when they dare to believe in something contrary to what the establishment already likes.
Yeah. They love citing polling data when it allows them to abandon trans people or be conservatives on immigration. But when it says like, hey, maybe you should support Medicare for all or like not give infinite money to Israel, suddenly then it's like, oh, well, we have to be nuanced about this position.
Suddenly you guys don't understand what's going on. Actually, I have intelligence I can't share with you. Actually, I have things that are going on that I can't share with anybody who like put me in this position. But
And here's why the language really starts to matter. Because when leadership says focus on the lessons, not the report, that sounds reasonable at first, but when you break it down, it creates a gap in understanding. The report is where the lessons come from. So if people cannot see the report, they have no way to fully understand, evaluate, or even trust those lessons. And this is not just a political issue. This is something people deal with in real life all the time. Imagine a company loses its biggest contract and leadership says they're going to investigate what went wrong. Now think about who's involved. You have employees doing the day-to-day work, and then they want to know if the issue came from something they did or from decisions made above them. And you have managers responsible for strategy, and they need clear information so they can fix the problem and avoid repeating the same mistake. Then you have stakeholders, right? Which in politics would be voters, donors, and volunteers. The people invest in time, money, and trust in the organization, and they want to know if the leadership made the right decisions and whether it makes sense to keep supporting them. So when leadership comes back and say, we found the problem, but we're not going to show you the report, this is where people pause, because at that point, it's not about politics anymore. It is just common sense. It raises basic questions. What actually went wrong? What decisions led to the outcome? What is being changed? And without seeing the full report, those questions do not go away. They become more important. It also makes the people who rocks with the Democratic Party and also voters and things like that basically feel like, look, you want us to support you, but do you really want to learn from your mistakes if you don't even want to show us the mistakes you made in the name of transparency? So are you in denial, or are you really deciding to grow from the lessons and the mistakes because you can't even be vulnerable enough to share or have the courage to share with us who are rocking with you? You know? Now, to be fair, there is another side to this. Supporters of this approach argue that releasing a full report could lead to internal conflict, distraction, or people focusing too much on assigning blame instead of moving forward. That's a real concern in any organization. But at the same time, transparency is not about comfort, it's about credibility. With truth come conviction, right? And I always say, for people I love and care about, and I'm sure you guys feel the same, I would rather tell somebody the uncomfortable truth out of love than actually let them decide to make a decision or watch them make a decision that destroy their life for a lifetime based on that choice. So if people feel like information type, going back to this situation, is being filtered or controlled, it naturally creates doubt because they are being asked to trust something they cannot verify. So what we are really seeing here is a balance between managing the message and being open about the facts. And right now, many people feel like that balance is leaning too far toward control.
I want to start with the 2024 autopsy, which you call an after-action review. When you won the chairmanship in February of 25, you criticized the DNC's refusal to release their 2016 autopsy as exactly what not to do. You said, quote, was there any utility in doing that? And then promised your 2024 autopsy would be different. Your exact quote was, of course it will be released. Why did you change your mind on that?
Well, look, I mean, what I said all along, even when I ran for this position, is that we were going to focus on the things that will help us win the upcoming election, right? Making sure that we learn the right lessons that could help inform our victories. And that's what we've done. We said this when we sent out the press release back in November saying we weren't going to release the report. We were going to actually keep our focus on those lessons. And we released those lessons. We continue to do that. So it's not completely accurate to say that we didn't release that. Where we're keeping our focus is on the lessons that can actually help us win.
On this show in August, you told me this about releasing the review, quote, we have to do it to give people who invested so much time, energy, and money a sense of what happened and why we lost. Especially why we lost. So what changed between August and December? I understand there are lessons, but those are not the full report. Why not release the full report? What's in the report that you wouldn't want to publicize?
Yeah, there's no smoking gun in the report. And I know that's what everyone's so eager to learn. The smoking gun. Guess what, John?
But if there's no smoking gun, why wouldn't you just release it then?
Because we want to keep the focus on the lessons. Because what ends up happening here is that people, of course, want to weaponize the report in a way to look backwards, to point fingers, place blame in a way that actually doesn't keep us focused on the upcoming election.
Well, or could it be that you want to avoid accountability that you say you want to actually embrace by sitting there learning the lessons? But do you really want to learn the lessons if you don't want to have the full transparent conversation, even with your voters and individuals who support you? Right? It closes out the aspect of different perspectives. And I'm just talking about life because it's bigger than this, family. If you can be open-minded to other perspectives, then you're limited and you're closed-minded to what you want to hear. So if you're limited and closed-minded to what you want to hear, how can you truly grow? See, when you aren't transparent or you're not able to have productive conversations, whether you agree or disagree or not, you are not open to other perspectives that you may not have been familiar with. See, if I have a conversation with a loved one, right, and I share a perspective that they may not know a perspective of, and I listen to them because they are sharing something with me that I may never have even seen from a different perspective that I'm not aware of, that I don't know about entirely. That became interesting, like, never thought of that perspective. So the whole thing, it tells me, it shows in the name of voters and supporters who are against them not releasing the report, the overall sentiment and the overall thing I hear people saying is that with the lack of transparency, it really leads to more ignorance than anything. But it's dressed up as, oh, but we just want to focus on the lessons. You can still be positive, but still have a difference of opinion. But then it also goes back to sort of feeding into, and I'm just being fair across the board, where individuals say, hey, I'll give you an example with Mark Zuckerberg. When a lot of different people had different political opinions and censorship was taken on Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg, this is facts, you can look it up, came out and said that the Biden administration basically wanted me to censor Facebook on certain people saying political things, and conservatives felt more attacked on the Republican side. Well, it feeds and adds more fuel to the fire, because if you can't be transparent with your own individuals, your own supporters in the Democratic Party, and then the Biden administration has basically been, the truth had been told from Mark Zuckerberg, who runs Facebook, who's like the owner of Facebook, basically saying this is what the Biden administration did, advocated for censorship. It also shows censorship and infighting within your own party, because if you don't say what I want you to say, then we're not going to say it at all, but you're going to focus on what I want you to say. And that's what this gives off. We're not going to focus on having a transparent conversation about lessons, but you're going to focus on what I said, which is be positive and don't worry about the lessons we need to learn. But we understood the lessons, and that's all that matters. But you don't need to know about them, but focus on what I said, the positive. And it goes back to my point, leaning too far toward control.
But instead, the navel gazing of focusing backwards actually takes us backwards. We're 189 days from this election, John. What we don't need to be focused on is actually relitigating 2024. What we need to do is learn the lessons of 24 and the years preceding that can help us win this upcoming election. I get why people are obsessed with it, because there's various groups and organizations and people who think there's some sort of smoking gun in there. Guess what, John? In the third closest presidential election in the last 100 years, everything mattered. There's nothing that didn't impact that election.
Why did you spend the money going to 50 states, doing all these interviews, doing all this stuff, and doing this report in the first place, if you weren't going to release the full results of it? Like, why? I don't get why just you and some of the senior DNC people get to see it, but not most of the DNC members who are, state party chairs. I mean, more than a dozen DNC members told NBC just the other week they want it released, including Congresswoman Delia Ramirez and North Carolina Democratic Party Chair Anderson Clayton. And Anderson said, quote, "Genuinely, what did you all find that we did not?"
And then also within the supporters of the Democratic Party, in their mind, it could be, okay, well, maybe we want to be transparent and show the report, because the things that you're doing back from 2024 is the same thing you're doing now, and it yielded a result that they didn't like. So obviously your supporters may be uneasy about what's going on now, because it's repeating the same mistakes that you said you learned the lessons from. So let's have the conversation. If you keep doing the same things, will you get the same result? Maybe supporters are concerned with that, and that's why they want the report to be open, so you can make the corrections and everyone could be on the same page. But if not, you don't want to have the conversation, then there's a disconnect. So diving deeper into what may have contributed to the loss, because this is where the conversation moves beyond just the report into the bigger picture. And this is also where Michigan becomes very important to understand, with the whole, what was his name? Sean Fain, with the auto manufacturing business, and he was the president of the union, and they were protesting, and basically the Hyundai plants and all the plants was going to Mexico, and Americans was losing job, and auto manufacturing was going down because they were taking their businesses to other countries like Mexico for cheaper production, cheaper costs for workers, and sitting there and still selling the products such as Hyundai cars back into America, while American jobs were lost and infrastructure was gone. And the simple fact is, Michigan is the hub for the auto manufacturing business in America, which means elections, when it comes to Michigan being a swing state, elections, there are often very close and can go either way. So even the small changes in voter turnout or support can shift the entire outcome. In past elections, Democrats have relied on strong turnout in key areas of Michigan, including the working class that I just mentioned, or working class communities in places like Dearborn, which has one of the largest Arab American populations in the country. So when analysts look at Michigan, they are not just looking at who won or lost. They're looking at which group showed up, which group stayed home, and why. In 2024, there were reports showing that turnout dropped in some Democratic leaning areas compared to previous elections. And when turnout drops in closed states, that can be enough to change the result. One explanation that has been discussed is frustration among some voters, particularly Arab American communities, over U.S. policy. And this is just one issue, but over U.S. policy related to Gaza. And that likely played a role for some voters, especially those who prioritize foreign policy issues. But here, where it is important to slow down and look at the full picture, because those same voters were also dealing with the same day-to-day issues as everyone else. Things like rising costs, rent, groceries, and overall economic pressure. And this is the key point. Most elections are multi-factor, not single issue. Voters usually make decisions based on a combination of things, including economy, personal finances, leadership perception, and sometimes specific policy issues. So while Gaza may have mattered for some voters in Michigan, it is more realistic to see it as one factor among several, not the only reason for the outcome, because when multiple concerns build up over time, this is what shapes voter behavior. Whether that means changing votes or choosing not to vote at all. And this connects directly back to the main point about the DNC report. Because if the goal of the report is to explain what went wrong, then it should reflect the full complexity of what actually happened, not just one explanation. Because if a report focuses too narrowly on one factor, it risks missing the broader reality of why voters made the decision they did. And that is exactly why people are questioning why the full report is not being released. And looking at the two massive voting blocks the Democrats were trying to balance, the traditional pro-Israel base and the rising pro-Gaza activist wing. From an objective standpoint, that was a mathematical nightmare because for decades, the pro-Israel stance was the safest bet in American politics. It was the default. But in 2024, that shifted. According to the leaks with the major outlets that he mentioned, like Axios, the DNC's internal autopsy actually labeled the administration Gaza policy as a net negative, right? So think about what that means in plain English. The support they kept by staying pro-Israel was outweighed by the support they lost from people who were pro-Gaza. We aren't just talking about people being sad on Twitter, now known as X, formerly known as Twitter. We're talking about the voter demobilization, right? So when you really see it in the divide within the Democratic voter base or supporters, U.S. is a major ally of Israel, primarily because of a strategic security deal that has existed for decades. We provide them with billions in military aid and high-tech weapons because they act as our partner in the Middle East, sharing vital intelligence and helping test American military technology in real-world scenarios. However, the long-standing alliance created a massive split between the Democratic Party during the 2024 election because the IMEU Policy Project, which is a research group focused on Palestinian rights, revealed that in private meetings, DNC officials admitted their own internal data, often called, which we already talked about, the 2024 autopsy, showed the administration's handling of the war in Gaza was a net negative for Kamala Harris, because the party lost more support from young progressive and Arab American voters, especially in swing states like Michigan, than they gained by sticking to the traditional pro-Israel policy. Ultimately, the 2024 loss happened because while party leaders were trying to protect the old security alliance, they ignored a huge chunk of their own voters who felt that American bombs were used to hurt innocent families, leading many to stay home on election day and effectively decide an outcome because they think, oh, well, there's a lot of civilians getting hurt in Gaza, innocent individuals, because Gaza was using families as human shields to protect their country from the bombs and things that we were providing to Israel military aid wise. And since Israel um, hit buildings when it came to, Gaza. The Hamas hides their buildings using human shields. So the pro Gaza side was saying, look, even if that's true, you can't blow up the whole apartment complex full of kids to get one bad guy. They argue that the math of war has become evil, killing hundreds of innocents for one target, right? And when you look at it, right, from the Lehigh law glitch, right? This is a real U.S. law that says Americans cannot give weapons to military units that commit gross human rights violation. The pro Gaza side said the pro Gaza side is basically saying, and even with the leak memos, says that the U.S. is breaking its own laws by ignoring reports of units hurting civilians just to keep the strategic ally, aka Israel, happy. And when you look at it from the Israel side, you have to understand the no boots rule, right? Israel is the only ally in the Middle East that doesn't ask for American soldiers to fight their wars. By giving them high-tech weapons, the U.S. ensures a powerful friend is holding the line against rivals like Iran without having to send American kids into combat, right? And if you think of Israel as a live fire testing ground for American tech, like I mentioned, because the Iron Dome, let's say, for example, were co-funded by the U.S. now. The U.S. Army actually uses that same technology to protect American bases. We give them money, they give us battle-tested data when it comes to the pro-Israel side. So the intelligence pipeline in the real world safety means information. So Israel has one of the best spy networks in the world. They share secrets with the U.S. About terrorists and cyber attacks before they ever reach American shores. To the pro-Israel side, if Israel gets weak, American ears and eyes and ears until the Middle East goes blind. So that's the divide that you're seeing, family, within this whole thing with both sides that um, really hurt the Democratic Party and also the election when it came to Kamala Harris and that whole situation. And I think that's why it's important and critical for the transparency that the supporters are advocating for, because what you're seeing right now is, to go a little bit deeper as well, um, Kamala Harris may have lost, may, because of a theory of, cumulative failure. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything from an open border to an economy where people couldn't afford eggs. But the Gaza data is a smoking gun. It represents a choice. And you can't control global inflation easily, but you can control your policy stance. And while the DNC was telling the public that their foreign policy wasn't the problem, their internal numbers were likely showing they were bleeding support from the very people they needed to turn out, right? So, with all that being said, it also comes off as gaslighting to the very next level when it comes to Ken Martin and what you've seen in the clip, because it's basically saying stop looking at the evidence and just listen to my summary of the evidence. You can't fix a problem if you refuse to acknowledge. And when you look at that, right, with the corrosive secrecy, when leadership performs transparency for the cameras but hoards power behind the scenes, it eventually destroys the organization's culture from the inside out, right? And as a neutral observer between the establishment Democrats and activists, I'm just kind of like, you deserve each other, because the activists deserve the gaslighting they get from the party. They refuse to leave, right? The only way you put power, instead of party over people and people over party is you have to hold them accountable within your own party. It doesn't matter what party you rock with, right? And that's what will keep the constant infighting if you don't hold them accountable. So the party can't even be straight with the people that voted for them about a report they promised to release. It just shows a fundamental lack of respect for the voter. And if you don't like you don't like the way you're being treated, then maybe the answer isn't to vote harder. Maybe it's to realize that if the machine doesn't respect you, you don't have to feed the machine, right? So, and getting mad at another political party with the whole Trump derangement syndrome, as they call it, it's not justification to get out and vote for Democrats for people you hate. But the bigger takeaway here isn't about red versus blue. It's about the elite, the typical politician versus the truth. And if they won't tell you why they lost, they'll never tell you how they plan to lead. And at the end of the day, the situation is just more than just one report. It's about how trust is built or lost over time. And when leaders promise transparency and they change direction, this does not automatically mean they're something may be hidden, even though I don't know why would you don't think it would come off as not being hidden perception wise, because you said you would release it, but it's raising questions about consistency and it is consistency, right? And that's what builds credibility. So to take it a step further, not just on the transparency tip, but your credibility is being lost. And this applies to any organization, not just politics. If people are told that what there will be shown and what went wrong, and that changes, it creates a gap between expectation and reality. And that's where skepticism starts to grow. That's why I'm saying it's more of a credibility tip. And once your credibility tarnishes, then look, man, even if something is hit or not, you hit. And look, I see arguments on both sides, to be fair, because some would say focus on our future is more productive, while others argue that understanding past mistakes to prevent the same mistakes happening is necessary to move forward effectively. Both perspectives have some merit, but here's the bigger point. Trust does not come from what you say, it comes from what you show. And when people feel like they're being asked to trust without being shown a full picture, it naturally creates doubt. It's not about politics, it's just how people think. So the real question here is not just why the election was lost, it's whether being selective with information helps rebuild confidence or makes people question things even more. My view is simple. If the goal is to move forward with credibility, transparency usually does more good than harm, even if the information is not perfect. That's my whole point. With that being said, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe the report should be released, or does focusing on our future make more sense? And if you found this helpful, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. I'll catch you next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity, and let the love supersede the hate. On that note, family, peace.